Welcome back from our break. We are already a little late, and that's largely my fault. That's okay because we've got lots of time. Lunch is after this, and no one here is hungry. We have some really amazing guests, not like those other guests. We start with Bryant Walker Smith. Now, to be clear, I don't consider myself a journalist, but I do consider myself a member of the media. And in an effort to educate myself about self-driving and automation and policy, I have been looking for 2.5 to 3 years for something to read that is intelligent. And it is really, really difficult. And if I'm having trouble, and I'm, work at Time Inc., I can imagine how it is for many of you. So on the short list of people whose every word is worth reading, you have Bryant Walker Smith, whose biography is almost implausibly good. He's an assistant professor at the School of Law and School of Engineering at the University of South Carolina, and the rest I'll let you read. Suffice to say that everything he's been saying, and he's been saying for 3 to 4 years longer than anyone else who claims to be an expert, because expert is pretty much in this sector a worthless term. The only thing that is worth anything is someone who says something first that remains true when everyone else piles on. So we'll now let Bryant Walker Smith tell us a little about what he has to say today. Thank you so much, Bryant.
Wow. Thank you. That's a pretty good intro, huh?
Yeah, I think I need to ask you to rewrite my bio. Gosh. So I'm going to talk to you today about what I call the trustworthy automated driving provider. I don't think anyone ever told me what to talk about, so thank you for just letting me talk about whatever I want, and then hopefully you'll agree that it was worth your 10, 15, 20 minutes. But because I'm feeling nostalgic and retro, I want to go back 130 years to a transportation technology that revolutionized the world, that everyone was talking about, that threatened to terrorize pedestrians in communities, that promised greater freedoms for women and for children, and that was front page news week after week in newspapers. So I'm talking, of course, about the safety bicycle, which in fact had a brief moment of glory 130 years ago as the next big thing until the internal combustion engine and the car came around and pushed it off of its perch for at least a half century and probably more. I think there's an important lesson there as we talk about the technology singular or the next big thing with automated driving, that everything lasts only until the next big thing. Now, the next big thing was, of course, the automobile, and that stuck around. People loved the car, except for a few communities that didn't, like Nantucket, which passed a law prohibiting the car. Now, like any law, people are going to find a way around it. It is an important point of humbleness and modesty for the lawyers that I teach. You don't get to make something true just because you pass a law. And so the car was prohibited, but the local mail delivery person said, well, I can solve that. So just hooked up his car to his horse, pulled it to the village line, and then drove on. Now, eventually, the popularity of the car was so much that it overcame ordinances like this, and Nantucket repealed theirs around the time of World War I, and you can now drive cars on Nantucket. But people really were enthusiastic about the car. They said the car is amazing. It is the green transportation technology. It is the environmentally friendly way to get around. Does anybody know why? Yeah, you're all getting smarter. Yes, horses. So around the turn of the century, there were about 100,000 horses in New York City. The average horse deposits about 25 pounds of manure a day. You can do the math. Horses also had the unfortunate habit of dying, whereupon, unlike a used car, they would essentially lose all of their value, and the prudent owner would simply leave them to rot in the streets. That's manure. I always love being the pre-lunch speaker. I'm rarely asked to be it again. And this was really, really bad. And so the car came around and people said, this is great. We have solved urban pollution forever. Fast forward a few years, and what we see is that this is the story of progress, of engineering, of policy, that you take one set of problems, you replace it with a new set, and you just really, really hope that your new set of problems in aggregate is smaller than your old set. That's the kind of policy making that prudently, realistically, we're going to be doing. Now, even these great green cars weren't entirely green. They had all manner of problems that had to be worked out. So, for example, the 1911 Oldsmobile, for any car fans, yes, I realize this is a year earlier, about 10% of these Oldsmobiles would just catch on fire in your average year. You'd be driving, you'd look back, and you'd see your car was on fire. You'd say, well, shoot, my car's on fire. I better pull over and do something about that. And in fact, one of Alex's predecessors, can we say, writing for the industry publication Horseless Age, complained how manufacturers would simply put out a car with a certain thickness of axle and then see how many complaints they got from customers about that axle breaking. And say, oh, well, that axle broke. We should probably make it a little thicker and stronger in our next iteration. Oh, well, complaints are going down a little bit. We think we may have gotten to the right thickness, and so on and so on. I'm just going to give you this. No, it's true. It's true. Oh, you were one ahead of me, Alex. No, see, like Tesla. Yeah, like Tesla, like Facebook, like any company today, where it is common practice to simply try out new features, see if you change the experience for 10% of your users, if usage goes up or down, or dating goes up or down, and based on that, to roll it out broadly or more narrowly. And as Alex so presciently, so you said that the definition of an expert is to say something first before anybody else gets to it. You proved your own point. You proved your own expertise because you got to it 2 whole slides before I did. So like Tesla, calling its vehicles beta, either because they're experimenting or because they don't want us to experiment. I'm not really sure. The Germans weren't really fond of this and said, well, if beta means that something is an incomplete status, then of course we would not approve it. And a class action lawsuit saying a beta vehicle is half-baked software that renders vehicles dangerous. Now, the reality is that everything is beta. Everything is constantly improving, or should, whether we call it beta or not. But this brings up the core question that I think is going to confront not just the technologies, not just the industries, but the companies themselves, and that's trust. What does it mean to be trustworthy? What does it mean to be a trustworthy automated driving system developer or a vehicle manufacturer or actor in this field? I have an idea. I actually have, 6 ideas. I think a trustworthy company should market only what it believes to be reasonably safe. A trustworthy company should base that belief on compelling evidence, not a gut feel, not one drive down a road without the vehicle going off into a ditch, but compelling evidence. The trustworthy company should update that evidence over the entire life cycle of its products. It should not say, well, it was safe then, it must be safe now. And it should act in response to those updates. If something is dangerous, it should do something about it. If something could be safer, it should do something about it. A trustworthy company should mitigate harm in the case of failure. Yes, it should update, but it should also willingly compensate people who were harmed by a defect. It should not just compensate the people who can get through all of the legal hoops and in the end prevail. It should compensate the people who were reasonably harmed by its failures. And the trustworthy company should communicate candidly with the public. It should appropriately manage public expectations so that we don't all think that every kind of automated driving vehicle is imminent, and that we can all sleep right now, so that we're prepared for the inevitable failures and the inevitable crashes, so that we can realistically know what we are all getting ourselves into, and with good reason. Many, in fact, most of these are not legal obligations today. Perhaps these should not be legal obligations. Perhaps they should be ethical, moral obligations of a responsible company, but they should also be strategic obligations of that company, because ultimately the companies developing these systems need the trust of regulators, and they need the trust of the public in order to overcome the inevitable difficulties that they're going to encounter down the road. Now, why is trust challenging? Well, first, we're not talking about the technology. We're talking about a wide range of products, applications, technologies, business cases that are changing, that are complex, that are embedded within each other. Regulators are not in a position to properly oversee all of this rapidly changing diversity. They have limited resources, they have legacy expertise, they have slow processes, and we have a public that is fickle and misinformed. I looked at you when I said that, and I didn't mean to, because you're informing the public. Thank you. Still, they're misinformed. So what do we do about that? Well, regulation does have a role. Why do we regulate? I would say it's to correct market failures. It's to correct the things that the market can't take care of itself. That might be safety. System developers might lack incentives to act reasonably safely. If you are a small startup that could either make it big or go broke, well, you're going to do everything to make it big, even if that risks going broke in the mechanical rather than the financial sense. But trust may also be a system failure, because the public may lack the resources, the time, the information, the expertise to decide if something is reasonably safe. They don't know. And so they need to look to somebody, something else, to tell them what is deserving of their trust. And for all the criticism that governments receive, at the end of the day, when something goes wrong, people do turn to them and say, why didn't you protect me? And so there is a trust that governments have and that governments can choose to grant to industry. Now, of course, regulation is imperfect in all sorts of ways, and that means the status quo is also imperfect. We have all kinds of inefficiencies that might hinder or advance automated driving, and automated driving in turn might exacerbate or ameliorate many of those imperfections. We can talk about that for hours. We won't. But that brings us to the question of how safe are we trying to get to? If we accept that everything is a beta, what are we moving toward? We don't know. But the fact that we don't know doesn't mean that we are stuck in stasis, that there's nothing that we can do, that we just have to wait until somebody tells us. In fact, this is normal, because nothing we buy, design, or use is absolutely safe. And no system that has a human user is functionally deterministic, where we know the outputs based on the inputs, because there's that human in the middle to mess things up. That human to find all of the new and exciting ways to misuse and abuse any conceivable product. If I look out here right now, there's probably somebody misusing a chair. Yup. So how safe is safe enough? Well, it's safer than the thing that just exploded. How safe should my toaster be? Well, I don't know, but that toaster over there on fire, that one's not safe enough. That's the story of innovation and of product safety. In regulating that safety, we need to provide space, certainly for technical innovation, recognizing the range of technologies, applications of those technologies, business cases for those applications, realizing that governments don't design motor vehicles, that private industry, by and large, designs the vehicles, and that governments shouldn't pick technological winners and losers. And all of this mandates lots of flexibility for developers to innovate, to come up with a range of solutions for a range of problems. At the same time, we want space for regulatory innovation. This gets much less attention. Safety assessment needs innovation. Safety assessment needs new ideas in simulation, new ideas in validation, verification, and assurance. People trying to make money with V&V. We need that kind of innovation. Just because we have numbers doesn't mean we'll have answers. There are philosophical questions in the world of safety that we are never going to resolve. Open versus closed systems. Anyone aware of this debate? Yeah, is a system more secure or safer if it's closed and one manufacturer controls everything and no one else can get into it? Or is it safer if everybody can get in and experiment? This is Android versus Apple, roughly. And we're never going to come up with the numbers that definitively resolve that. We're always going to fight about it, and so we can't regulatorily decide what is best. Safety assessment is incredibly expensive. Aviation offers an illustration of that, where a significant portion of the cost of developing a plane is software, a significant portion of that is validating and verifying the software. We're talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And so finding a way of doing that more efficiently could save us all a lot of money and could make some of you a lot of money. This isn't as sexy as innovation in consumer products, but it's as important and potentially as diverse. All right, so how do we get there? The goal is, as I see it, deserved trust, earning trust and being able to evaluate trustworthiness. There are lots of ideas. Years ago, I advocated something I call the public safety case. That is very similar to what NHTSA eventually coined as safety assessment letters. Yeah, they're better with language than I am. What Congress is proposing in the form of safety evaluation reports, and what NHTSA has been doing for years in its exemption process. Inviting a developer to make an argument for the safety of its system. But all of that's happening federally. What about what states are doing or can do? Well, there are efforts now toward developing a model state law. And it is entirely legitimate and appropriate to ask, is a model state law, is any state law necessary? Is it useful? And is it timely? There has, in the years of state legislation, been this tension between people who say, well, do something, and even if that something is to be restrictive. One of the things that really impressed me about Florida generally and Senator Prentice specifically was the willingness to say, we want to help and we want to be careful. And we're not going to go down the path of other states that have said, we want to encourage automated driving. And the way we're going to do that and show everyone that we're really enthusiastic about it is to make it really hard to do. I never figured that out, why that was the preferred marketing approach. But Florida did not go down that path. The other approach is to do nothing. To say, well, there's no law that you should enact, there's no action that you should take. That's been appealing to a lot of developers that haven't yet figured out what they are doing, and so don't want a law that restricts their future activities. But once those developers have figured out what they're doing, then their tune changes, and they say, well, you should do this and only this. Pass the law that we want and pass no other. These don't mix very well together. And so the best approach, I think, is to be thoughtful. Here is a brief plug for how you can help people be thoughtful. The Uniform Law Commission, which is the same state-based organization that gave us the Uniform Commercial Code and made it really easy for us to buy things, is trying to draft a model state law. This will take a couple of years, but the first substantive drafting meeting is coming up in a couple of weeks. And stakeholders, i.e. all of you, have an important role to play in that process and an important active voice at that and similar meetings. One of the aspects of that model state law that I am most excited about is the notion of defining an automated driving provider, who would be the legal subject of the vehicle code. So who's the legal subject of the vehicle code today? Typically the vehicle owner or the driver. That's a little more complicated in our world of no human drivers and different ownership models. This automated driving provider self-identifies in order for the vehicle owner to be able to register the vehicle. The provider could be a manufacturer, a developer, a retrofiter, an owner, an operator, insurer, anybody who is willing and able to make a promise. In law, we would say the person that expressly warrants the automated operation of an automated vehicle to be reasonably safe. But that's just a fancy term for promising. Okay, bear with me. Under this early draft language for the uniform law, which is a straw man for all of us to attack, registration of an automated vehicle may be granted, maintained, and renewed only if by means of a current electronic record automatically retrievable by an agency in any of the participating states. The automated driving provider does a bunch of things. They describe what the vehicle's system can and cannot do. They provide proof that there is insurance sufficient for the operation. They represent their belief in the reasonable safety of automated operation. They represent that there is clear and convincing evidence supporting that belief. They say, we may not share it all with you, but we have actually done the work that convinces us that what we are doing is reasonably safe. And importantly, they warrant to the public that the automated operation of the vehicle is reasonably safe. They promise to the public that the system is reasonably safe. And if the idea of promises sounds familiar, that is the underpinning of the levels of automation developed by the Society of Automotive Engineers. They are based on the idea of a promise by the developer to the public about what a system can do. That was a lot of text. So here's a picture again. Yeah, it was simpler back then. Driver, vehicle, horse. We don't really regulate the horse. But we don't really, in the future, have a driver. So what steps in? Well, maybe it's the automated driving provider. Maybe it's the entity that can warrant to the public that a system is safe and is prepared to earn the public's trust, is prepared to be a trustworthy company, to market only what it believes reasonably safe based on compelling evidence, to update that evidence and act in response to those updates, to mitigate harm and to be candid with the public. I'll end with the real rationale for all of this, and that comes, depending on your preference, from either Voltaire or Peter Parker's uncle. With great power comes great responsibility. We have companies that are amassing great power and that will need and should want to exercise responsibility commensurate with that power. Thank you.
That was exactly as awesome as I had hoped based on his reputation. I want to apologize for interrupting you. I honestly did not look at your PowerPoint before this. I had no idea what was coming up. It is what it is. And he's absolutely correct. Most of what we call the media covering this topic are whores and shills who will do anything for traffic. And a very rarely quoted metric is that 40% of the stories in the world pertaining to automotive news have Tesla in the title. It literally does not matter if a Tesla got a flat tire anywhere. Someone will find a reason to make a story about that, and it's really pathetic because it's clouded the entire conversation about this, and it's sad, with an exclamation point, sad. Okay, well, let's move on. We have Mike Scrudato, who adheres to the rule that the shorter your bio, the more knowledgeable you are, which is generally quite true. So Mike is Strategic Innovation Leader at Munich Reinsurance of America in Princeton, New Jersey, which we can stop right there because, as we all know, almost every conversation about this topic has to include the question of, well, is my insurance going to go up or down in an autonomous world? It's all anyone cares about, especially if you want to keep driving your car. Because if we are to compel people into these vehicles without mandating it by a law, the other way is to raise their insurance rates. And boy, that's not going to work with me. So, Mike, coming up, let's hear what you have to say.
So thanks for giving me the chance to be here in Florida and get out of New Jersey for a few days. Just a question to the audience. When you looked out this morning at the beautiful scenery outside, or you looked at the cool demos out there, how many of you thought insurance? Not as many hands as Uber users from earlier today. But really, insurance is a big part of the equation for autonomous vehicles. And when you listen to Bryant's comments earlier, he talked about trust. Certifying these are going to be reasonably safe based on some compelling evidence over the life cycle. Acting responsibly, mitigating harm, communicating about the safety. I sat there, and maybe it's only me because I live in the world of insurance. I'm like, wow, he's talking a lot about insurance. So today, what I want to talk about is the fact that really insurance is not a barrier for autonomous vehicles. There are policies available today. Munich Re was one of the first to insure autonomous vehicles. We're doing it today. We've got our underwriting team here that does that. And there are a lot of questions about insurance, but it is not something that should stop the progress of autonomous vehicle deployment. You know, this is a little fact sheet that we've put together at Munich Re that talks about how do you get insurance for autonomous vehicle? How do you get insurance for everything? And I just want to spend a couple minutes walk you through that progress, because a question we often get was, well, how do I get insurance? I know nothing about insurance. So if you just follow the road here, you know, a specialized agent or specialized broker, believe it or not, there are insurance agents and brokers that specialize in autonomous vehicles. They've developed the expertise, they've developed the relationships with insurance carriers that provide this and help connect many of the stakeholders providing these vehicles with many of the insurance providers in this market. And then, once you've found that, be prepared to talk about your business operations. You know, this is a new technology. There's not a lot of historic data and actuarial tables about it. So a big part of what you have to evaluate is not just, you know, the limited data you have, but it's also the business operations, the business plan, making sure you understand the risk that that company can be successful. Moving down the road, the blue sign of autonomous vehicle regulation. Obviously, this varies by state, and many of these regulations have insurance requirements, making sure that you're getting the insurance that's appropriate for the state in which these vehicles are operating. Based on that, you get quotes for an insurance policy. So you pick one that is the best match, and ultimately you're looking for is a partnership between the carrier and the company. And then finally, the last slide on the road there, autonomous vehicle data. This data is the key to helping to continue to develop the right types of insurance products, to help quantify the safety benefits of these technologies. It's without data, you know, the insurance industry is forced to make assumptions around that. And that data is the key to proving out the safety benefits and to help build up some of the trust that Bryant talked about earlier today. So this is a fairly routine process within the insurance industry. And if you leave nothing else from my comments, it's to show you that this process exists for autonomous vehicles, that you can insure these today, that they should not be a barrier. So why is Munich Re helping to lead the way and helping to lead the industry around this. The safety statistics, you've heard these already today. You'll probably hear them from other speakers again later in the presentation. Obviously, there's a safety case for this. There's fatalities. We heard about the fatalities involving trucks. There's injuries. There's an economic benefit. Ultimately, many of these are borne by the insurance industry. So we would like to see all of these numbers go down. And I'm sure there's a question I'll get later. Well, if insurance rates go down, doesn't insurance premiums go down? Well, yeah, but who wants to see 4.6 million injuries per year? Who wants to see 40,000 fatalities per year? So it's in everyone's best interests, including the insurance industries, to see these numbers go down. But there's more than just safety. There's access to transportation. There's the famous Google self-driving car project. Their first video was the blind driver going through, picking up his dry cleaning, going through the Taco Bell drive-through. Access to disabled people, access to elderly people, access to low-income providers. There's a whole access to transportation element to this as well. And finally, there is an environmental benefit. You see these clogged roads. We've talked about the urban nirvana and the connection between autonomy, connected vehicles, shared vehicles, and electric vehicles, which are potentially more environmentally friendly. It's not all positive. We've already talked this morning about the impact on jobs, and there will be new types of jobs created. Other types of jobs will go away. We heard Riley earlier talking to his take on the taxi drivers. There might be less of them. But this is not a new phenomenon associated with autonomous vehicles. With every type of technology advance, new jobs are created, other types of jobs go away. So this is nothing specific and new to autonomous driving. So that's why Munich Re cares. And how does insurance need to change? This is just a chart that we've put together, and I'm not going to go into each piece of this. I know insurance is not everyone's favorite topic here. But what I want to call your attention to here is that you see some types of liabilities will decrease. Other types of liabilities we expect to likely increase. For example, you see cyber risk. 15 years ago, there was no such thing as cyber insurance for a business. Today, that's a $3 billion industry. Another audience participation question: has anyone here purchased cyber insurance for your vehicle or for your fleet? Thank you for confirming an ongoing Munich Re study that the current size of the auto cyber market is 0. So as vehicles become increasingly automated and increasingly connected, the cyber exposure grows there. We expect at some point there will be some type of cyber risk component to auto-related insurance. And the point here, you see, it's all likely to increase or likely to decrease. Our law department makes us say that, but also we don't know how this technology will evolve. The business cases will evolve, and like that, the insurance products will evolve. So when people are trying to say, what's insurance going to look like? How are we going to do this? Well, we don't know. But most of the speakers we're going to hear this week don't know exactly how technology is going to evolve, and those business cases will evolve. The point is, we want insurance to evolve with it. So when we look ahead, what are some of the potential shifts that we see? Liability shifting from a driver to the manufacturer. And people ask, how is that going to work? Is the policy going to change? What's going to happen if there's a driver and sometimes the person's driving and other persons it's not, in automated mode? Well, there's a potential scenario in which it works much like it happens today. A car crashes, a claim is settled, and if something is the fault of the manufacturer, the fault of the car, there's a process called subrogation. that liability is chased down by the insurance company. Most of the time, as a policyholder, you have no idea that this happens. The only thing that you know is that your claim got paid, usually fairly quickly and expediently, and then the insurance company works it out. So there's a framework there that exists for certain levels of automation today. You see auto physical damage, cyber, product warranty. Some of that may increase. And you might be wondering, physical damage grow? Well, part of that is as you're putting more technology on the vehicle, a simple fender bender is no longer a simple fender bender because of the amount of technology that's in that bumper. So today we're seeing, some of that physical damage is actually increasing. Exposure is becoming more complex. A car in the future will be more complex than the car of today, just like the car of today is more complex than the car of the picture that you saw earlier on Bryant. Then telematics or connected vehicles or this use of data will continue to grow. The more data that's available from a vehicle, whether that's a connected vehicle or an autonomous vehicle or a shared mobility platform, the consistent thread in all of them is the ability to take large amounts of data and more accurately predict what's going to happen, build that into how we're building insurance products, how we're charging for insurance products. And what Munich Re is trying to do, what we're trying to lead the industry, is making sure that not only us, but other insurance companies understand these issues, are continuing to involve with them. And now, for my last slide, which you'll see based on Brian's presentation and my presentation, if you speak at enough autonomous vehicle conferences, you are required to show this picture in all of your presentations. So you've heard the background from Brian, but we look at it from a slightly different context. The transition from the horse to the auto, insurance was a big part of that. There was no such thing as auto insurance as we moved from horse-drawn carriages to automotives. And somehow the insurance industry evolved, created a product, created an industry which is today the largest line of business in property and casualty insurance in the US and almost every market around the world. So much like this transition, the insurance industry was able to figure this one out. We believe that with the coming transition, the insurance industry will figure that one out too. Thank you.
I also have that picture in my presentation because in the old days, before cars, people still went cross-country as fast as they could, and somebody set the record for a horse-drawn car back in the day. I don't know what that record is, but I'm going to break it. We are running short on time. I don't know how that happened, so we're going to cancel the last presentation. I'm just going to read his bio because it's so long, it would basically wrap this whole session up. Gary Silberg from KPMG. The only important thing in this vast document is that you wrote something 5 years ago called Self-Driving Cars, the Next Revolution, which, given what it costs to hire KPMG, may be the one time the money was well spent by your client, because you were correct, and your suit reflects that. So why don't you come up here and give your presentation, and every minute you spend speaking is a minute less for Q&A, which will protect some of the startups that are in the room. Good luck.
Thank you. But we're going to go quickly. I'm more the Oprah style. Thank you. Thank you. There, I know. My goodness. All right, I've got a question for the audience, so we'll just start. How many cars did your family have? 4. How about yours? 5. Yours? 2. How about you? 3. You? 3. 3. Anyone over 5? How much most we have in the room? How many? 10. There we go, babe. So in the United States, do you know what per household the average number of cars in the household of the United States is? Anybody know? 2.2 approximately. Okay. So I'm actually a CPA, but I did study economics in grad school. And one of my great intellectual heroes from the great University of Chicago I was honored to attend. Let's pretend Milton Friedman's here, okay? And we need Milton Friedman. So I'm going to do a quick survey, and I want all of you to raise your hands, and I want you to raise your hands high. Pretend Milton's here. So how many of you, on purpose, want to spend $35,000 on average for an asset, and on purpose lose 11% of the value the minute you own it? Okay? And I want you to promise, and I mean promise, to make that asset sit idle 96% of the time. So all of you out there, raise your hand. There you go. Here's our car. Now, I make that joke, but the average price of a car is around $35,000. The average loss the minute you buy it is about $11,000, and the average time it sits idle is 96%. So clearly, this is not a smart economic decision. That being said, and this is what my talk is going to be very quickly on, is the economics of the future is going to look a little bit different if we have optionality and we have technology. And I'm going to talk about consumers, I'm going to talk about how they're changing and what the implications are. And I'm going to tell you the punchline up front. It's going to be different. There's going to be real winners and there's going to be real losers, but net on net, it's going to be fantastic for society as a whole and for many, many, many people. So with that being said, just a quick history. Yes, I did write this paper 5 years ago. I had a full head of hair at KPMG, being the slight narcissist. I, of course, was waiting for the applause, kind of like the senator. Silberg's gone off the reservation, he's smoking, whatever that was. And now the paper did become quite famous. I got to be on CNBC Squawk Box. I got to be on Bloomberg West, you know. Hell, even CCTV in China had me on there. So next year we knew we were onto something. We wrote a paper called Self-Driving Cars, Are We Ready? It was the first paper to actually talk to consumers what they thought about cars. Self-driving cars that didn't exist. Huge finding there was that the trust level that you were just talking about, Brian, the trust level was actually with technology companies. Way back in 2013, they would even trust them more than premium brand manufacturers. Think about that. The auto industry was shocked by this paper. They're like, how the hell did we let these tech companies steal this story from us? We're gonna go get them. And so the next year we wrote a paper called Me, My Car, My Life. It was a paper about making people's lives better. This was not just about technology. For my Uber friends, you were just kind of getting started. There was that nascent company, Uber, and we thought that was going to be big, and we wrote a lot about that and thought that was going to be fantastic. 2 years ago, we wrote, I don't know if I can go back, we wrote a paper called The Clock Speed Dilemma, and that paper is actually based on Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity. We'll hold that for another day, but it's the idea of how do you innovate with multiple clock speeds. The auto industry operates at 5 to 7 year clock speeds because they spend $1 billion in plants. They have to have their cars work at minus 30 degrees and plus 130 degrees. And all of us don't want our car rebooting at 80 miles an hour. And then you have the tech industry that's operating at these incredible clock speeds. And the punchline of the paper is, how do you meld those two worlds together? It's really intellectually simple to say. It's incredibly hard to do. And we argue in this paper that most companies will not be able to solve the clock speed dilemma. And those who can't do these worlds together will be out of business. But those who do are going to have a fantastic future. Our last paper is called I See, I Think, I Drive, I Learn. It's a paper on deep learning and artificial intelligence. This is the secret sauce to how Uber is doing it, how Lyft, or not Lyft, but Tesla, Google, or Waymo. If you get a chance, and I know, Roy, you love to read, I will send you these papers on this type of stuff, but this is the one. We are announcing in 2 weeks, I have to be a little flamboyant, our greatest ever paper? No. Basically, to talk about how self-driving cars are going to roll out. We're going to announce that actually at the Los Angeles Auto Show, and I think you guys will really think it's cool. All right, so 2 areas I want to talk about and go a little more detail. How many of you work in the automotive industry? A few people. Anybody work in manufacturing? Okay. So let me just give you the history of how automotive works from an innovation perspective. There's a pyramid. This is the old school. And at the top of the pyramid is the king, called the OEM, the car manufacturer, or the queen, as my wife likes to say, and says, thou shalt make me a steering system. And what happens? 3 tier 1 suppliers come in and say, Oh, dear OEM, we have this great tier one, we have this great steering system, pick me, pick me. And they get their tier 2s, their tier 3s, and tier 4s. It's a pyramid. And back here, with a bullwhip, whoosh, who am I? I'm purchasing. They beat the you-know-what at them. They actually beat us up on us suppliers. You'd think we make so much good rates, but it's a pretty nasty business. That's how automotive is how automotive works and has worked. This is the new ecosystem. This is an ecosystem of innovation. We call it the molecule slide. These are different players where the OEM sits in the nucleus, if you will. And this is how I think everybody here should think about innovation going forward, especially in this industry. How many of you heard of Nutonomy? Anybody heard of Nutonomy? All right. Carl Yanema just had a little startup company, was bought out. We talked about it earlier by Delphi Corporation, I think close to $500 million. Anybody heard of Mobileye? There you go. Do you guys know Mobileye's story? It was basically a defense play early on, and Professor Shashua licensed this technology from Israel, comes to the United States. I don't know if we can disclose what they were working on the defense side, but basically a car could see, it could stop, it could save people's lives. You would think that was a simple concept. Through artificial intelligence comes the auto industry, and what do the people at the top of the pyramid do with Mobileye? Oh, little child, you know nothing about automotive. Our cars work at minus 30 degrees and plus 130 degrees. We'll go develop this technology in-house. And in fact, what they did is they wasted a lot of their time because they think at their 5 to 7 year clock speeds, they can do it all themselves. And this little company called Mobileye gets on 3 of the world's top premium brands. Next thing you know, they do an IPO. I don't know if it was 3 or 4 years ago. Anybody know the IPO price? $8.2 billion, the largest IPO in Israeli history. They're now on 25 out of 27 car manufacturers. And about 4 months ago, 5, I don't remember the dates, maybe it's a little bit longer. Anybody heard of this little company called Intel Corporation? They bought them for $15.3 billion. They've moved their autonomous headquarters to Jerusalem, and combining those two together, operating at these incredible clock speeds. This is innovation. Anybody heard of a company called NXP Semiconductor? Anybody heard of that? A few. Very good. This little company called Qualcomm announced a $40 billion acquisition of NXP. If you read all of what they're talking about, it is absolutely, positively automotive. This IBM thing called Watson, you ever heard of Watson? They're working with General Motors now in their car for AI. Microsoft is entering this, and we've already talked about Google. If I would have come up here and told you about these technology companies 5 years ago, and we were talking about automotive, you would have said, what are you talking about? But this is where the innovation is happening. We heard the VCs this morning. It is phenomenal. And the way you need to think about innovation going forward, and by the way, the auto industry is not sitting idly by, not at all. They are, these tier one suppliers and the OEMs are investing billions and billions of dollars to try to play and win in this industry. But mark my words, this, with venture capital and the universities and the tech players, this is the new ecosystem in innovation. Not everybody's going to make it, but it is absolutely fantastic, and it's happening at clock speeds we've never seen before. Everybody clear on this idea of the new innovation system, okay, the ecosystem. All right, so what is that driving? It is driving a new way of thinking about with consumers. This is a very important slide, and it's excellent for the industry, and it's cities and states need to think about this. So let me just give you the punchline. We studied for 40, 50 years personal miles traveled, and there's a calculus to get the vehicle miles traveled. But think of it as a curve, a normal curve. 0 to 15, mom and dad have to take you around. Then you go through your life cycle, then it drops. So look how it kind of drops at people at their ages when they hit 60 to 74, and went down like this. So we did focus groups. These were not statistically significant, but I promise you, we did them in Chicago and Denver and then Atlanta. We had 2.5 people in the focus groups cry in a focus group. This is my third focus groups that I've done. Do you know why they cried? We asked them to tell a story about mobility and their parents. And have you had to take keys away from your parent or parents? Raise your hand. Has anybody in here had to do that? It's quite gut-wrenching, right? And then we asked the question after that, well, if you could push a button and get mobility for the rest of your life, or your parents could, would you be interested? And I mean, off the charts, everyone said, of course, of course. And what we learned was after we asked this question, I mean, literally 2 people cried, and the third guy told the story, and he almost teared up, was that this group of people want mobility the rest of their life. Moreover, the people in our focus groups, and I guarantee you, everyone in this room right now is thinking about, no one's taking my keys away from me, right? I mean, do you want your keys, right? That's right. So all we did at KPMG is we said, well, before you couldn't push a button, that was it. So we said, now you can push a button in an automated vehicle, or heck, it doesn't even need to be automated yet. If people push a button, they can get transportation wood way, and we came up with very small use cases on that, very small. And what we found astonished us. This was one of the biggest findings of all of our research. There are 81 million boomers, and if you these are incremental miles. These are miles that would never have been driven because you couldn't push the button before. If you slightly increase that, you get 500 billion incremental miles just in the United States from this group. We went to the other side of the coin from 0 to 15. I live in Chicago. I live in the city of Chicago at Lincoln Park, and I can say for my kids, they're oversubscribed, they're playing tennis, they're in the band, Mom and Dad cannot take them around everywhere and all the time. I guarantee you, your kids are probably just like that, or your grandkids. So the question was the same to them. If you could push a button and a self-driving car would show up for this, would you allow it? Or if it was your car? Oh my God, the moms were off the chart. Like, when? When? And in fact, we had one who said it's 6 years old. I'm like, really? 6 years old? You put it? But the vast majority. So all we did there was tweak those numbers. There are 83 million millennials. There's more millennials, actually, than boomers. Same math, 500 billion incremental miles. We did not touch the middle at all. So our data says that you will have 1 trillion new incremental miles just at the tails in just a little bit, okay? This paper was quite famous, and actually the Department of Energy looked at it, and I got to give a talk at the Department of Energy to 4 of their national labs. I can tell you the policy before this, this is not politically correct, but they were thinking everybody was kind of hold hands and, oh, we're all going to share and everybody's going to just get along. We're like, no, in fact, people are going to be pushing the button, and you're going to better think about your energy policy differently, because this is how consumers actually behave. This is a big deal. Clear on this point right here, okay? Big, big opportunity. Last point in the middle of it, we didn't touch the middle. You're a New Yorker. How far is it from Midtown to Wall Street? 4 miles, 3 miles?
Between 10 minutes and 3 hours.
There you go, there you go. So all on traffic, there you go with the rain. So a lot of our analysis says you can do that for a consumer at 50 cents a mile for a consumer, okay? So let's make it 5 miles, okay? So from Wall Street, or from Midtown to Wall Street, 5 miles times 50 cents is $2.50 for a consumer. What is the pleasure you can take, granted all else equal, to sit with your fellow humans at 95 degrees in that lovely subway in New York? How much is that today?
I think it's $2.
I think it's more. How many from New York? You don't take the subway here.
Well, I get a Metro card, mobility.
Okay. $2.75, I believe, in New York. So we didn't touch this group, but I can tell you, you can tell that story in many other cities. The optionality of pushing the button from Chicago when it's freezing out in that group, this number could soar. I'm not going to get you into the calculus. We don't have time, but you can look at, we did a bunch of scenarios. I can send you the papers, and you can think about what scenarios work for you, but all of our scenarios were up. So what does this mean? This is the implications for consumers, back to our Milton Friedman. So if you could push a button, if you went from 3 cars to 2, I forgot who said that this morning. I thought that was spot on. That's exactly how we look at the world. You'll go from 4 cars to 3. You'll go from 3 cars to 2. I am not up here telling you car sales are going away. They are not. People are going to own cars. They love cars. We buy things. We love things that we own. But they're going to decline. And this is the future world. So we think this is non-AV personally owned vehicles. By 2040, we think personally owned vehicles will make up about 40% of the miles traveled, and this is what we call AV MAS. This is the automated vehicles where we're driving you around. And lastly, I want to show you, which is the coolest thing, is this is creating, these incremental miles is creating another trillion, this is close to $1 trillion new industry for selling miles and services. $1 trillion. So for all the pessimists out there who are saying, jobs are going away and negativity, we have $1 trillion industry that is up for grabs. It could even be a lot bigger. This is fantastic news. This is absolutely fantastic news. America, if you're into America's great technology story, we lead the world pretty much in this area. If we get the regulatory side right on that, insurance, we can talk about this. We can really lead the world. And I think the state of Florida is really an advance in this area. This is a phenomenal job-creating opportunity. There will be winners and losers, and we have to take care of people, and I don't want to be glib about that. But I think with the economic rents that we'll get from this, it's going to be fantastic. This, I don't have time to go through, breaks it down in much more detail. And I'll stop on this one slide. And my optimism about the future, we're going to see stunning innovation, the reshaping of the automotive ecosystem, and there's absolutely great reason for optimism. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Again, exactly as good as I would have hoped from you. Thank you so much, Gary. That was really great and well worth the fortunate cost to generate those reports. Most of the reports I read are literally toilet paper. And by the way, everything you said I think is sound, except there's one thing, which we'll get to later today, which is human psychology. The reason I don't know what a single trip costs and the cost per mile in New York City is because the definition of mobility is vague, and in my mind, mobility is when you take two problems and solve them at once, in motion. And my problem is, I don't want to carry change, and I like to just pay up front with a credit card. So I have a Metro card. I have no idea what my cost per mile is because it's the same cost to me whether I go 3,000 miles or 20 feet. But we'll cover that later. We are so short on time. We have literally 4 minutes, which means quick questions. Who's got a question? Not Riley Brennan. That's so unfair. That's not right. Do we have someone from Florida government who has a question?
This is going to be a quick and easy one.
Who's that guy behind you? Where do you work? Where do you work, sir?
I'm Kevin Salz with the Jacksonville Transportation Authority.
Oh, so you are in Florida government?
I'm in Florida in government.
So I'm sorry, Riley. We have to give him the question. We're in Florida. Senator Brandis organized.
Sure.
It's only fair. We're here to learn something that will benefit the people of this fine state.
My hand. All right, so my question is really a comment for Mike. Mike, you talked about cybersecurity and even insurance. So I wanted to share there's something called information sharing and analysis organizations. They were created by an executive order from the Obama administration, and they're for cybersecurity to bring together private and public entities to collaborate on identifying threat vulnerabilities and addressing them. And there is one around community transportation based right here in Florida. At the
Is this a
Kennedy
question?
Space Center. No, this is informative. And so... And here's the real key piece. Okay, so if an organization joins the ISAL, there's indemnification for sharing that data, and so that gets into that cybersecurity insurance issue. And I just wanted to share that with Mike.
If you have
Thank
any
you
other
so much.
Declarations, please give your business card to people on the panel. We're here for questions.
Okay, I have a question.
Riley, quick,
This is a
let's
quick
do
one.
it.
Great. In the future, are automated vehicles a platform for conservatives or liberals?
That's a good question, and probably outside the scope of this conference. It's worth its own day. Would anyone like to answer that in 45 seconds?
I have an answer. Both. The automated vehicles, I think in underserved communities, we've written a lot about this. This is going to be fantastic. One of the worst things for jobs is if you're in an underserved area, is you have to, I can talk about Chicago, but we have horrible weather. Even in nice weather, Los Angeles, you have to wait hours for the bus, or once you get on the bus, you go to long distant places, and if there's not another time, you can spend 2 hours, 2.5 hours just to get to work and then to get back for a $10 an hour job. Automated vehicles have the potential to serve communities that have never been served before with efficiency and cost. And if we decide as a society to subsidize this, this absolutely could be fantastic. And I would hopefully say that is a conservative and a liberal or progressive view of the world, both.
Bryant Walker Smith, sorry to cut you off. Do you have 30 seconds on this? Because we have to wrap this up and have respect for the state senator.
Liberal or conservative, they're the shopping mall of the future. They're going to displace government. Is that provocative enough for your provocative question?
That's great.
That's a good one.
Cinnabon or
I'm going to
Ross.
say one more thing, and then we have to wrap this up, unless you have to say something.
Thank
Which
you.
is, if you think the most, in my opinion, progressive or forward-thinking politicians on this topic happen to have come from both the Republican and the Democratic parties, and they would seem to have very little in common, except they both care about jobs. And so this is the topic, if anything, that is going to break up the parties of the future and reunite them around single issues. This transcends parties, liberalism and conservatism. I'm actually highly optimistic because of what Gary said, because the United States is at the forefront of this revolution, and therefore at the forefront of an evolution of both parties to adapt to the consequences, the second and third order consequences of this technology. So unless someone else is going to run up and try to sell something, we're going to break for lunch. Thank you, gentlemen.